There are 3 rules on the American frontier. Don't waste water, don't waste bullets, and never, ever waste an opportunity. When the richest cattle baron in the territory, James Hollister, rejected his mail-order bride right there on the depot platform, he broke all 3. He wasted the water in the spit he launched at her feet. He wasted the bullet he might as well have put through her heart. And he wasted the opportunity to see what was standing right in front of him, because what he called livestock in a dress, loud enough for the whole town to hear, was the one thing that could have saved him. And when she didn't cry, when she didn't beg, when she just stood up, all 6 feet of her, and looked him dead in the eye and said, "Your loss." A man in the shadows made his move. His name was McCabe. He wasn't rich like Hollister. His ranch was a graveyard of bones and dust. His cattle were walking skeletons. His well was spitting mud. But he knew one thing Hollister didn't. Out here, pretty gets you buried. Strong keeps you breathing. He offered her a deal that day. Not marriage, not kindness, just survival. But what Catherine Brennan didn't know, what McCabe couldn't possibly know, was that survival was the last thing she was looking for. She was looking for a reckoning, and it had just found her. Let me tell you how we got to that moment. Catherine had packed her whole life into a single, battered trunk. Her mother's wedding dress was the only fine thing she owned, its ivory lace yellowed by time, the seams groaning across shoulders built for hauling water, not for holding a man's gaze. For 3 months on a farm in Pennsylvania, she'd practiced a smile in the mirror. Soft, demure, the kind of smile that made small men feel tall. And when her intended groom, the man whose letters were filled with cheap poetry, saw her for the first time, he actually gagged. A wet, heaving sound of pure disgust. The air at Thornton Station was a fist in your throat, thick with copper dust and the ghosts of last chances. The platform was a sea of judgment, men in sweat-stained hats, women with mouths like pinched coin purses. Hollister stood there, younger than his letters, handsome in that clean, cruel way of men who've never known a day of real work. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, his collar was starched so stiff it could cut you. When the station master pointed Catherine out, Hollister's face twisted like he'd just bitten into a rotten peach. He didn't even walk over. He just shouted, his voice a whip crack across the shuffling feet and curious stares. That's what they sent me?" A nervous titter went through the crowd. "I ordered a wife," Hollister boomed, playing to his audience now, his voice dripping with theatrical outrage. "Looks like they sent me livestock in a dress." The laughter this time was harder, meaner. It was the sound of a pack turning on the weak. Men nudged each other. Women hid their smirks behind their hands. Catherine felt something inside her chest not break, but harden. Crystallize into something cold and sharp and dangerous. Her heart had been broken so many times it was just scar tissue. No, this was different. This was the last thread of hope she didn't even know she had, snapping clean. The crowd waited, hungry. They wanted tears. They wanted a woman on her knees. They wanted the spectacle of a complete collapse. She gave them a war. Catherine straightened her spine. Every inch of her 6-foot frame went rigid. She locked eyes with the handsome, cruel man across the platform, and she spoke 2 words that would echo through the rest of his very short life. "Your loss." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy, cold as a stone at the bottom of a river. It cut through the laughter and left a ringing silence in its wake. Hollister's face went from smug to purple in a heartbeat. He took a step forward, his hand clenching into a fist, but the station master, seeing a brawl about to erupt, put a hand on his arm. Hollister spat on the dusty platform, inches from the hem of her mother's dress, then turned and stalked away. The crowd, their show over, began to melt away, still whispering, still stealing glances at the giant woman left alone with her trunk. Catherine sat down on a bench. The sun hammered down, turning the wedding dress into a sweat-soaked cage. Her hands trembled, so she pressed them flat against the rough wood of her trunk until they were still. And a voice in her head, the one that had whispered to her whole life, said the words she'd always believed. You were a fool to think anyone could ever want you. Hours passed. The platform emptied. The sun bled across the sky, painting the mountains in brutal shades of red and orange. She didn't move. Couldn't move. Where would she go? She had 17 cents and a broken promise. Then she heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. They stopped in front of her, and a long shadow fell over her, a sudden relief from the relentless sun. You got anywhere to go? The voice was rough, like wind over rock. She looked up. The man was all harsh lines and weathered skin, his face a road map of hard years. Gray streaked his dark hair. But his eyes, the color of a storm cloud, weren't mocking her. They weren't pitying her. They were just looking, like he was measuring her. No, she said. The truth was the only thing she had left. He nodded once. Name's McCabe. Got a ranch 10 miles west of here. He paused, his eyes still fixed on her. Place is falling apart. Cattle are dying. Well's almost dry. I need help. Real help. The kind that doesn't quit when things get hard. Suspicion coiled in her gut. What kind of help? The kind that keeps a man from losing everything he's got left. His voice didn't soften. Can't pay much. Room and board. Hard work from sunup to sundown. Not asking you to be my wife. Not asking for anything else. Just honest work. She searched his face for the trap. For the lie men always told with their eyes. All she saw was an exhaustion that went bone deep. Why me? His jaw tightened. Because when Hollister called you livestock, you didn't break. He bent down, picked up her trunk with an ease that spoke of a life of heavy lifting. Storm's coming. You can sit here and wait for it, or you can come with me. He started walking toward a tired-looking wagon. Then he stopped and looked back. Your choice. Catherine looked at the empty platform, at the darkening sky. She stood up. 3 rules on the frontier. She was done wasting opportunities. They rode in silence as the stars came out, sharp and cold in the blackness. The ranch, when they reached it, was little more than a collection of shadows against the skyline, a small weathered house, broken fences, the feeling of a place where hope had packed its bags and left years ago. Barn's got a cot, he said, climbing down. House has a spare room, if you don't mind ghosts. Ghosts? He didn't look at her. My wife and son. Fever took them 3 years back, haven't changed a thing. Now he looked at her, his eyes hard as iron. If that bothers you, take the barn. She understood. This wasn't a rescue. This was 2 drowning people agreeing not to pull each other under. I'll take the room, she said. The house smelled of dust and loneliness. He showed her to a small room with a narrow bed. Breakfast is at dawn, he said, and closed the door. Catherine sat on that hard bed, in a dead woman's room, wearing her mother's wedding dress, and listened to the thunder rumble in the distance. The storm was here, but it wasn't the storm she needed to worry about. The real storm was the one brewing inside this house, and the one that was about to follow her from town, and she had a feeling it was going to break everything. The first morning, Catherine woke to a rooster screaming and the smell of burning coffee. For a second, she was lost. Then it all came flooding back. The station, Hollister's sneer, McCabe's offer, this room, this bed that didn't belong to her. She opened the door to find McCabe at the stove, his back to her. Coffee's ready. Biscuits are in the oven. Eggs are in the hen house if you want to collect them. No good morning, no false kindness, just facts. She was grateful for it. I'll get the eggs, she said. The ranch looked even worse in the daylight. It was a testament to a man who had given up. Fences sagged like tired old men. Weeds choked what might have once been a garden. But the sky was enormous, a clean, endless blue that made her feel small and oddly hopeful. They ate in silence. The biscuits were burned, but she ate like a starving wolf. When they were done, he stood. "I'll show you the work." He led her to a patch of dry, cracked earth. "The well went dry 8 months ago. Been hauling water from town, but it's not enough. The cattle are dying." He pointed to a hole about 4 feet deep, with a pile of rocks next to it. "Started a new one last month, hit solid rock, need to try a different spot." He handed her a shovel. "Or we lose everything by winter." She took the shovel. It was heavy, the wood worn smooth in some places, splintered in others. "Where do we start?" Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, like he'd expected her to walk away. "Follow me." They dug. The sun climbed, turning the air into a shimmering furnace. Her hands blistered, then broke open and bled. She didn't stop. She just wrapped them in strips torn from her petticoat and kept digging. McCabe worked beside her, a relentless machine of muscle and grief. He didn't offer encouragement. He didn't offer a break. He just worked, and she matched him, swing for swing. Around noon, he finally stopped. They sat in the sliver of shade cast by the barn. "You always work this hard?" he asked. It was the first personal question he'd ever posed. "Had 5 brothers," she said, looking at her ruined hands. "Farm in Pennsylvania. You learn quick. Keep up or get left behind." He studied her. "Why'd you leave?" "Brothers got married. Their wives didn't like having me around. Said I made them look small." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Pa gave me $20 and the newspaper clipping for the Hollister ad. Said maybe out west, my size wouldn't matter so much." McCabe's jaw tightened. "My father was a drunk who beat my mother to death. I don't put much stock in what fathers think." He stood up. "Ready to get back to it?" They worked until sunset. The hole was 6 feet deep, a pathetic start. That night they ate beans and salt pork on the porch, watching the stars ignite. "Your wife," Catherine said into the darkness. "What was her name?" He went still. She thought he wouldn't answer. "Anna," he finally said, his voice flat. "My son was Thomas. He was 4. He set his plate down. Got sick in the winter of '73. Fever. Thomas went in 3 days. Anna held on for 5. By the end, she was begging me to let her go." He looked out at the vast, empty darkness. "I couldn't save them. Couldn't do a damn thing but watch them die." A thick silence settled between them. "Why did you really bring me here, McCabe?" "The truth." He turned to look at her, his face half lit by the lamp in the window. "Because when I saw you sitting on that platform, I saw Anna right before she died. That look. The one that says the world's already buried you, and you're just waiting for the dirt to cover your face." He paused. "I couldn't save her, but maybe I could save you." Something cracked open in her chest, not breaking, opening. "I don't need saving," she said softly, "but I could use a reason to stay alive." "Then we've got a deal," he said. Later, lying in the narrow bed, every muscle in her body screaming, Catherine stared at the ceiling. For the first time since she'd left home, she didn't feel like she was disappearing. She felt like she was digging toward something, but she was digging in the wrong place. The problem wasn't that the well was dry. The problem was what was in the water that was left, and it was the same thing that had killed his family. 3 weeks passed. The blisters on Catherine's hands became calluses. The ache in her shoulders became a familiar, dull companion. She and McCabe fell into a silent rhythm of shared labor. Up before dawn. Work, break, work, eat, sleep. The new well was 12 feet deep and still as dry as a bone. But Catherine was learning the ranch. She learned that a certain patch of weeds near the old dry well grew twisted and yellow, while the same weeds 50 yards away were green. She noticed a faint metallic sheen on the rocks McCabe had pulled from the first failed well. She saw how the cattle avoided one side of the trough, even when they were mad with thirst. She didn't say anything. On her father's farm, asking questions got you a backhand. Noticing things others missed got you called a witch. So she kept her observations to herself, filed them away like secrets. On the 23rd day, the silence was broken. They were in Thornton Station for supplies. Catherine was loading sacks of flour into the wagon when she heard a voice that slid down her spine like a snake. Well, look what crawled out from under a rock. James Hollister. He stood 10 feet away, flanked by 3 of his ranch hands. He'd been drinking. The smell of cheap whiskey rolled off him in waves. Heard you've been playing house with that broke-down rancher, Hollister sneered, spitting McCabe's name like it was poison. Guess even livestock gets lonely. His men laughed. A small crowd started to gather. This town loved a show. Catherine kept her voice level. Move along, Hollister. He stepped closer, invading her space. You embarrassed me in front of the whole territory, and now I hear you're spreading your legs for a man who can't even keep his own well from drying up. That was it. The rage that had been simmering inside her for weeks ignited. Say that again, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Hollister grinned, a flash of white teeth in his handsome face. You heard me. You're a... She didn't let him finish the word. Her fist, hardened by weeks of swinging a pickaxe, connected with his jaw. There was a sickening crack, like a dead branch snapping. Hollister went down hard, blood spraying from his mouth. The crowd gasped. For a heartbeat, everything was frozen. Then Hollister's men went for their guns. This is it, she thought. This is how I die. A gunshot exploded, but it wasn't aimed at her. McCabe stood in the doorway of the general store, a rifle in his hands, smoke curling from the barrel. The bullet had kicked up dirt 6 inches from the nearest man's boot. Next one goes through bone, McCabe said. His voice was dead calm. It was the calm of a man who had already made his peace with killing. The 3 men froze. McCabe stepped off the porch, the rifle never wavering. Hollister, get up. Hollister staggered to his feet, spitting blood and a broken tooth. His eyes were wild. You're making a mistake, McCabe. Only mistake here is you thinking you could touch what's mine. The words hung in the hot, dusty air. What's mine? Something shifted in Catherine's chest. This isn't over, Hollister snarled, wiping his bloody mouth on his sleeve. Yes, McCabe said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. It is. Next time you come near her, next time you even speak her name, I will kill you. Not wound you, kill you. Hollister looked from McCabe's cold eyes to Catherine's furious ones. Whatever he saw there made him take a step back. He muttered something to his men, and they backed away, pulling him with them. They left. The show was over. McCabe lowered the rifle. You hurt? He asked Catherine, his eyes scanning her for injury. No, she said, her hand throbbing. I'm fine. You hit him pretty hard. He deserved worse. A flicker of something, a smile maybe, touched McCabe's lips before vanishing. Let's get home. The ride back was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. It was charged, electric, like the air before a lightning strike. That night, after a dinner neither of them touched, he sat on the porch, cleaning the rifle. Catherine came and stood in the doorway. You didn't have to do that, she said. Risk yourself for me. He didn't look up. Yes, I did. Why? He was quiet for a long time. Then he finally looked at her, his eyes full of ghosts. Because I'm tired of losing things. Anna died because I couldn't save her. Thomas died because I couldn't stop the fever. I've spent 3 years watching everything I care about turn to dust. His jaw tightened. I'm not losing you too. Her breath hitched. You barely know me. I know you work harder than any man I've ever met. I know you stood up to Hollister twice and didn't break. And I know, he set the rifle down, that for the first time in 3 years, I don't wake up wishing I'd died with them. He stood up and crossed the porch until he was standing in front of her. I'm not asking for anything, he said, his voice rough. Just telling you the truth. When Hollister rejected me, she said, her own voice barely a whisper, I thought it was the final proof, that I was too much, too big, too wrong to ever be wanted. She looked at him, at this broken man who saw strength where others saw a flaw. You didn't try to make me smaller. You just let me be. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm not good at this, he said. Haven't been with anyone since Anna. I've never been with anyone, she confessed. So we're even. This time he did smile. A real, small, heartbreaking smile. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was hungry and desperate and raw. A collision of two lonely souls who had forgotten what it felt like to be touched. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he whispered. Not just for the work. Stay, because you want to. She closed her eyes, feeling the solidness of him, the reality of him. I'm staying, she said. That night, she didn't sleep in the spare room. She slept in his bed, wrapped in his arms. For the first time in her life, Catherine Brennan felt like she was home. But as she drifted to sleep, she remembered the strange yellowed weeds by the old well. She remembered the metallic sheen on the rocks. And she remembered McCabe's words. Fever took them. It wasn't a fever, she thought, a cold dread seeping into the warmth of his embrace. It was the water, and Hollister knew it. He hadn't just been trying to humiliate McCabe. He'd been trying to kill him, slowly, the same way he'd killed his family. The next morning, while McCabe was out checking on the cattle, Catherine went back to the old, dry well. She didn't know what she was looking for, just a feeling, a cold knot of certainty in her gut. She knelt by the twisted yellow weeds and dug into the earth with her bare hands. A few inches down, her fingers brushed against something hard and smooth that wasn't a rock. It was glass, a broken shard from a thick, brown bottle. There was no label, but she didn't need one. Back in Pennsylvania, her father used a similar concoction to kill parasites in the sheep. A single drop too much would poison the animal from the inside out, a slow, wasting sickness that looked just like a fever. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. She ran back to the new well they'd been digging, her mind racing. She looked at the pile of dirt they'd excavated, then at the pile of rocks from McCabe's first failed attempt 50 yards away. The rocks from the first hole had that faint, metallic sheen. The dirt from their new hole didn't. It was a different kind of earth, a different water table. Hollister hadn't just poisoned the well. He had known exactly where the poison would go and where it wouldn't. He knew the land. He knew its secrets. But why? Why go to such lengths? It wasn't just about land. This was personal. This was hatred that ran deeper than any well. She found McCabe by the trough, his shoulders slumped. Another calf had died in the night. It's not the lack of water, she said, her voice tight. It's the water itself. It's poisoned. He looked at her, his face a mask of confusion and grief. What are you talking about? She held out the shard of brown glass. I think this is what killed Anna and Thomas. I think Hollister put it in your well. He stared at the glass, then at her, his eyes slowly widening with a dawning, terrible understanding. The color drained from his face. The years of quiet grief, of blaming himself, of blaming fate, all of it curdled into a new and terrible emotion, pure, unadulterated rage. Hollister, he whispered, the name a curse. He turned and started walking toward the house, his movements stiff, robotic. I'm going to kill him. No, McCabe, wait, she called, running after him. We can't just ride in there. He'll have men. We need proof. I don't need proof, he roared, whirling on her. I have 3 years of graves. That's all the proof I need. He was a stranger, his face twisted with a pain so profound it was terrifying. Think, she pleaded, grabbing his arm. If you ride in there, you'll be shot down or hanged. What good does that do Anna and Thomas? What good does that do us? The mention of us seemed to pierce through his rage. He stopped, his chest heaving. He looked at her, really looked at her, and the wildness in his eyes subsided, replaced by a bottomless ocean of despair. He killed my family, Catherine. He let me sit here for 3 years thinking it was a fever, thinking it was God's will. I know, she said softly. And we're going to make him pay. But we're going to do it the right way. We're going to uncover this. We're going to bring him to justice. But justice was a long way off, because at that very moment over the rise, a dust cloud was forming, a dust cloud made by a dozen horses, riding hard. Hollister wasn't waiting for them to come to him. He was bringing the war to them. And he wasn't just coming to kill them. He was coming to erase them. The storm came at dusk, not with rain, but with men on horseback. Catherine saw them first, a line of dark figures cresting the hill against the blood-red sunset. "McCabe," she said, her voice low. He was already moving, grabbing his rifle from its pegs over the door. "Get in the cellar," he ordered, not looking at her. "No." He turned, his eyes blazing. "Catherine, this is not a discussion. That's Hollister. He's not here to talk." "I know what he's here for," she said, grabbing the shotgun from beside the door. "And you don't get to protect me by dying alone." Outside, Hollister's voice boomed across the yard. "McCabe, send out the whore or we burn you out." McCabe moved to the window, his rifle ready. Catherine counted the shadows in the dying light. 10 men, maybe more. They were outgunned, impossibly so. "This is what happens when you humiliate a man like Hollister," McCabe said, his voice a low growl. "He can't let it stand." He looked at her, his face grim. "We fight, or we run." She thought of running, of slipping out the back and disappearing into the desert. But then she thought of the shard of glass in her pocket. She thought of Anna and Thomas, buried under a lonely tree on the hill. She thought of this broken man beside her, who had shown her a kindness she'd never known. This wasn't just his fight anymore. "I'm not running," she said. A fierce, almost feral grin touched McCabe's lips. "Then we fight." He kicked open the front door and fired. The shot ripped through the twilight, and one of Hollister's men screamed, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from his horse. "Next one's for you, Hollister," McCabe shouted. "Take your men and leave." Hollister's laugh was ugly and sharp. "You think that animal is worth dying for, McCabe?" Catherine stepped into the doorway next to him, the big shotgun leveled and steady. Her voice carried, cold and clear. "Call me that again, and it'll be the last word you ever speak." Hollister's face twisted in the gloom. "Kill them both." The world exploded in gunfire. They dove back inside as bullets tore the doorframe to splinters, shattered the windows, and punched holes through the thin walls of the house. McCabe returned fire with methodical precision, each shot aimed, each shot counting. One man went down, then another, but there were too many. "They're spreading out!" Catherine yelled over the din. "They're going for the barn!" The barn, the hay, the winter feed, their only chance of survival. She didn't think. She just ran for the back door. "Catherine, no!" McCabe's voice was a desperate roar behind her, but she was already outside, sprinting across the open ground. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet. One grazed her arm, a line of fire, but she didn't slow. She reached the barn just as 2 of Hollister's men were tossing torches into the open hayloft. She raised the shotgun and fired. The blast threw the first man backwards like a rag doll. The second spun around, his pistol coming up, but Catherine was already moving, swinging the heavy shotgun like a club. The stock connected with his skull with a sickening crunch. He crumpled, but the hay was on fire. Flames were climbing the walls, hungry and fast. She grabbed a bucket from the trough, filled it, and threw it on the fire. Again and again, her lungs burning with smoke, her eyes streaming. Then McCabe was there beside her, not shouting, not scolding, just fighting the fire with her, bucket after bucket, their movements a frantic, desperate dance until the last of the flames hissed and died, leaving only choking smoke and the smell of ruin. They stumbled out of the barn, covered in soot and blood, into a sudden, eerie silence. The shooting had stopped. Hollister's remaining men were gone, having fled into the night, leaving their dead and wounded behind. All except Hollister. He stood in the middle of the yard, his gun drawn, his chest heaving with rage. "You should have just given her up, McCabe," he snarled. "Should have known your place." McCabe stepped in front of Catherine. "My place is right here. Then you'll die here." Hollister raised his pistol. A shot rang out, echoing across the silent prairie. But it wasn't Hollister who fired. Catherine stood there, holding McCabe's pistol, the one he kept tucked in his belt. Smoke curled from the barrel. Her hand was steady. Her eyes were clear. Hollister looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his chest. He looked back up at Catherine, his mouth open in a silent "oh" of surprise. "I told you," Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. "Never again." He fell, his face hitting the dust. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then McCabe turned to her, his hands checking the bloody graze on her arm. "You're hurt." "I'm alive," she said. She looked at the gun in her hand, at Hollister's body, at the bullet-riddled house that was still standing. "We're both alive." He pulled her into his arms, a hug that was fierce and desperate. "Don't you ever do that again," he whispered into her hair. "Don't ever run toward the bullets. You would have done the same for me." "That's different." "No," she said, pulling back to look him in the eye. "It's not. We're partners now. We fight together." Dawn was breaking, washing the sky in pale shades of pink and gold. It was over. But as she looked past Hollister's body, she saw a figure on horseback, watching them from the ridge. One of Hollister's men. He hadn't fled with the others. He had stayed. He had watched everything. And as the sun rose higher, he turned his horse and galloped away. Not back to Hollister's ranch, but east. Toward town. Toward the law. It wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase. They hadn't just killed a man. They had killed the richest, most powerful man in the territory, and the only witness was riding to tell a story that would bury them both. The sheriff arrived at noon, a portly man named Blevins with a handlebar mustache and eyes that missed nothing. He wasn't alone. The man Catherine had seen on the ridge, a wiry ranch hand named Cale, was with him, looking smug. "McCabe, ma'am," Sheriff Blevins said, his eyes taking in the scene, the bodies, the bullet holes, Hollister lying face down in the dirt. "It was self-defense, Sheriff," McCabe said, his voice flat. "Hollister and his men attacked us." Cale scoffed. "That ain't how it happened. Hollister came here to talk, to settle things peaceful-like. McCabe here, he was waiting for him, ambushed him." "That's a lie," Catherine snapped. Blevins held up a hand. "Let's all just calm down." He walked over to Hollister's body and nudged it with his boot. "Shot in the chest, from a pistol, looks like." He looked at McCabe's rifle, then at the shotgun leaning against the porch. Then his eyes settled on the small pistol tucked back into McCabe's belt, the one Catherine had used. "Cale here says you shot him, McCabe," Blevins said, his gaze hardening. "Says the woman just stood there and watched. It was a clean lie, a simple story, and a man like Hollister's word, even delivered by a hired gun, carried more weight than a broke rancher's. Cale was twisting the truth just enough to make them murderers." "He's lying," McCabe said. "She's the one who—" "No," Catherine cut in, her mind racing. If they knew she fired the shot, a woman killing a man, no jury would ever believe it was self-defense. They'd see her as an accomplice, a seductress. McCabe, as a man defending his home, had a chance. She didn't. "He's right, McCabe. It's better this way." McCabe's eyes widened as he understood what she was doing. She was sacrificing herself on the story, banking on them believing the simpler lie. The sheriff seemed to consider it. Maybe, but there's something else. He walked over to the old, dry well. Cale mentioned you've been accusing Mr. Hollister of some wild things. Poison in your well, for instance. He kicked at the dirt near the well. His boot uncovered a small, rotted leather pouch, the same kind of pouch Catherine had seen her father use for the sheep dip. It had been planted. Blevins picked it up, sniffed it. Smells like strychnine. He looked at McCabe, his eyes cold and hard. Looks to me like you had a grudge, McCabe. A motive. You lured him out here and you killed him. That's not what happened, Catherine cried out. It's his word against yours, Blevins said, gesturing to Cale. And right now, I'm finding his story a lot more believable. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Elias McCabe, you're under arrest for the murder of James Hollister. They had walked right into the trap. It wasn't just a shootout. It was a perfectly planned execution, with a witness and planted evidence ready to go. Hollister had been planning this for weeks. He knew he was going to die that night, and he had set the stage to make sure McCabe would hang for it. As the sheriff led a stunned McCabe toward his horse, McCabe looked back at Catherine, his face a mixture of fury and despair. The journal, he mouthed silently. His office. The journal. It was a long shot, a desperate hope. If Hollister had planned this, maybe he'd been arrogant enough to write it down. Blevins put McCabe on his horse. I'll be back tomorrow with a wagon for the bodies and to take a full statement from the lady. He gave Catherine a hard look. Don't you go anywhere. She watched them ride away, McCabe's hands cuffed in front of him, Cale trotting alongside the sheriff, a triumphant smirk on his face. She was alone. The ranch was a wreck. Hollister's body was cooling in her yard, and the man she loved was being taken to jail, framed for a murder she committed. She had until tomorrow. One night to find a dead man's journal in his own house, on a ranch full of his men, and prove a conspiracy that sounded like a madwoman's ravings. The sun was setting. She looked at the blood on her arm, the gun in her hand, the impossible task ahead. Then she thought of McCabe's face, of the trust in his eyes. She wasn't just a mail-order bride anymore. She was a fighter, and her war was just beginning. Catherine didn't waste time on grief or fear. She cleaned and bandaged her arm, saddled McCabe's fastest horse, and stuffed her pockets with what little food they had. Riding to Hollister's ranch was suicide. His men would be there, angry and drunk and looking for revenge. Cale would have made sure of that. She had to get there first. She rode hard, not along the main road, but through the treacherous rocky canyons that cut through the desert, a shortcut McCabe had shown her once. The moon was a sliver in the sky, offering little light. The horse stumbled, and she whispered to it, calming it, her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Hollister's ranch was a fortress, a sprawling hacienda surrounded by bunkhouses and barns, lit up like a festival. She could hear the sounds of men shouting and whiskey-fueled laughter. They were celebrating their master's death and the downfall of his enemy. She left the horse tied in a ravine half a mile away and crept toward the main house on foot, moving from shadow to shadow, a ghost in the night. The main office, McCabe had told her, was on the ground floor, its windows facing the courtyard. The windows were dark. No one was inside, but two of Hollister's men were sitting on the porch right outside the door, sharing a bottle. There was no way in. She circled the house, her desperation growing. Then she saw it. A small wrought iron balcony on the second floor. A bedroom. And above that, a trellis covered in withered rose vines, reaching almost to the roof. It was a flimsy, desperate chance. She began to climb. The old wood of the trellis groaned under her weight. A thorn sliced her cheek. Below, the men on the porch laughed at some crude joke, oblivious. Her fingers, strong from digging, found holds in the adobe wall. She pulled herself up, muscle by muscle, until she was able to swing one leg over the balcony railing. She'd made it. The doors to the bedroom were unlocked. She slipped inside, into a room that smelled of expensive cologne and stale cigar smoke. Hollister's room. She moved through it, silent as a cat, and found the door to the hallway. Peering out, she saw it was empty. The office was at the far end. She crept down the hall, every creak of the floorboards a shout in the silence. She reached the office door and turned the knob. Locked. Of course. She took out the knife McCabe had given her, the one she'd almost used in town, and worked the tip into the lock. It was an old, simple mechanism. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she felt a faint click. The door swung open. The office was a shrine to Hollister's ego. A massive oak desk, leather-bound books he'd probably never read, a map of the territory on the wall with his land marked in red, and McCabe's small plot circled in black. She started searching. The desk drawers were full of deeds, receipts, boring paperwork. No journal. She checked the bookshelves, behind the books. Nothing. She was running out of time. Where would a man like Hollister hide his deepest secrets? Not in a place of strength, she thought. In a place of weakness. Her eyes fell on a framed portrait on the wall. It was of a severe-looking older man with Hollister's same cruel mouth. His father. McCabe had mentioned his own father with such bitterness. Maybe that was the key. She took the portrait down. It was heavy. Behind it, cut into the wall, was a small safe. Her heart sank. She would never get it open. She was about to give up when she noticed something. The safe wasn't fully closed. The latch was resting on the frame, not clicked shut. In his arrogance, in his rush to ride out and finalize his plan, Hollister had failed to lock it. She pulled the heavy door open. Inside, there wasn't gold or money, just a single leather-bound book, the journal. She opened it, her hands trembling. Hollister's handwriting was a neat, arrogant script. She flipped through the pages, scanning dates, and then she found it. An entry from 3 years ago, October 12th, 1873. The deed is done. Placed the last of father's special medicine in McCabe's well. He thinks his claim is older, that this water is his by right. He will learn, as his wife and whelp will learn, that this valley belongs to a Hollister. The sickness should look like any other winter fever. By spring, the land will be mine. Catherine had to clap a hand over her mouth to stifle a cry. It was all there. Cold, premeditated murder. She kept reading, her horror growing. Hollister detailed his entire plan. How he would use the mail-order bride as an excuse to start a feud. How he would plant the poison at the well. How his man Cale would act as the witness to the ambush. It was a confession. A full, damning confession. She tucked the journal into her dress. She had the proof. Now she just had to get out alive. She crept back down the hallway, her heart pounding with a terrible triumph. But as she reached the top of the stairs, she heard footsteps coming up. 2 men. They were coming to Hollister's room. She ducked back into the shadows of the hall, pressing herself against the wall. They passed her, so close she could smell the whiskey on their breath. They went into the bedroom she'd just come from. She had a few seconds. She ran for the office, locked the door from the inside, and rushed to the window that looked out over the courtyard. It was her only way out. She threw it open and looked down. It was a 12-foot drop to the hard-packed earth. Too high to jump without breaking a leg. She was trapped. Then, from the bedroom, she heard a shout. "Hey! The balcony door is open! Someone's been in here!" Footsteps pounded in the hall. They were coming for the office. They started rattling the locked doorknob. "Bust it down!" a voice yelled. Catherine looked around the office in a panic. Her eyes landed on the heavy velvet curtains. She ripped them down from the wall, tying them together with frantic knots. A makeshift rope. The office door splintered. She threw the curtains out the window, tied one end to the heavy desk, and scrambled out onto the ledge just as the door burst open. She didn't look back. She just slid down the rough fabric, the velvet burning her already raw hands, and dropped the last few feet to the ground. She landed hard, stumbling but staying on her feet. "There she is!" a man shouted from the window. A gunshot cracked the night air. She didn't wait for a second one. She ran. She ran faster than she had ever run in her life, across the courtyard and into the blessed darkness of the open desert, the dead man's journal pressed against her heart. She could hear them behind her, shouting, mounting their horses. The hunt was on. She raced for the ravine, praying the horse was still there. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, closer. She burst through a thicket of mesquite and saw him, a dark shape against the paler darkness of the rocks. He was safe. She untied the reins, her fingers fumbling, and threw herself onto his back. She dug her heels in, and the horse leapt forward, scrambling up the steep side of the ravine just as Hollister's men thundered past the opening, not seeing her in the shadows. She had escaped, but they knew she had been there. They knew she had taken something. They would be riding for town to tell the sheriff, to make sure that whatever proof she had was buried along with her. It was a race now, a race to Thornton Station, a race for McCabe's life. Catherine rode through the night, pushing the horse, pushing herself. Dawn found her on the outskirts of Thornton Station, her body a single screaming ache, her face scratched, her hands bleeding. The town was just waking up. She saw the sheriff's office, and in front of it she saw Cale, Hollister's man, talking to a deputy, gesturing wildly back the way she'd come. They were telling their story, painting her as a thief and a murderer. She was almost out of time. She dismounted, the journal clutched in her hand, and started walking toward the office. People on the street stopped and stared. The giant woman from the station, now covered in dirt and blood, walking like a soldier toward the law. Cale saw her first. His eyes went wide with shock and fear. "There she is! Sheriff! That's her! She broke into the house. She tried to kill me!" Sheriff Blevins came out onto the porch of his office, his gun drawn. "Hold it right there, ma'am. Drop the book and put your hands where I can see them." The town was gathering now, a crowd forming, just like it had at the train station. But this time, she wasn't the spectacle. She was the storm. "This book is a journal," she said, her voice loud and clear, carrying over the murmuring crowd. "It belonged to James Hollister." "I said drop it!" Blevins shouted, his hand unsteady. "It's his confession, Sheriff," she continued, taking a step forward. "He confesses to murdering Elias McCabe's wife and son 3 years ago. He confesses to poisoning his well, and he confesses to planning his own ambush, so that McCabe would hang for his murder." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Cale's face was white. "She's lying. It's a trick." "Is it?" Catherine said, her eyes locking on Blevins. "There's another name in this journal, Sheriff. Yours. It says here Hollister paid you $500 to make sure the investigation went his way, to make sure the evidence was found." Blevins froze. The gun in his hand wavered. The crowd, sensing a truth far more interesting than Cale's simple story, pressed closer. "Read it," Catherine said, holding out the journal. "Read it out loud for the whole town to hear. Let them decide who's lying." For a long second, nobody moved. The fate of 3 people hung in the balance. Then, a man from the crowd, the town blacksmith, stepped forward. "Let's see the book, Sheriff." Another voice joined in, and another. The tide was turning. Blevins, trapped, his face slick with sweat, knew he was beaten. He slowly lowered his gun. Catherine didn't hand the journal to him. She handed it to the blacksmith, whose hands were steady and honest. "Read the entry from October 12th, 1873, she said. And he did. He read Hollister's cold, cruel words out loud, his voice ringing with disbelief and disgust. He read about the poison, about the plan, about the bribe. When he was done, a furious silence fell over the crowd. Then they turned, as one, to look at Sheriff Blevins and a terrified Cale. Justice on the frontier was often swift and rarely waited for a judge. McCabe was released an hour later. He walked out of the jail and into the sunlight, and the first thing he saw was Catherine, waiting for him. He walked straight to her, ignoring the stares of the townsfolk, and pulled her into his arms. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. "I told you," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "We're partners." They rode back to the ranch, leaving the town to deal with its own rot. The sheriff and Cale were locked in the same cell McCabe had just vacated, waiting for the circuit judge who would, without a doubt, sentence them to hang. When they arrived back at the ranch, it looked different. The bullet holes were still there, the barn was still scorched, but it no longer felt like a place of ghosts. It felt like a place of survivors. They stood on the porch, watching the sun set, the same sun that had set on her first desperate day here. "What happens now?" Catherine asked. McCabe took her hand, the one that had saved his life twice over, and brought it to his lips. "Now, we rebuild. We fix the fences, we patch the walls, and we dig a new well." He smiled, a real, warm smile that reached his eyes. A clean one. He looked at her. "I was thinking you could stop sleeping in the spare room, permanently. Maybe we could make this official." Tears, good tears, stung Catherine's eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you, McCabe? I'm asking you to stay forever, as my wife, my partner." He pulled her closer. "As the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known." "I'm not beautiful," she said, the old words, the old lie coming out of habit. "You're wrong," he said, cupping her face in his rough hands. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, because when I look at you, I don't see what the world told you to be. I see exactly who you are, and that's everything." And she finally believed it. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." They were married a week later by the new honest sheriff. 6 months after that, following a spot Catherine had pointed out, a place where the rocks looked different, they hit water, clear, cold, and abundant. 9 months after that, Catherine gave birth to a daughter, with her father's storm cloud eyes and her mother's strength. They named her Anna. As Catherine held her baby on the porch of their thriving ranch, she thought about that day at the station, the day she believed her life was over. She'd been so wrong. It was just the beginning. My friends, this is where our story ends. But before you go, I need to ask you something. If this story moved you, if Catherine and McCabe's journey touched something deep in your heart, then please hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story like this one. And drop a comment below telling me where in this world you're watching from. Are you in Texas, Australia, New York, India? I want to know, because these stories of the Old West, of broken people finding each other, of justice hard-won against impossible odds, these stories belong to all of us, no matter where we are. So subscribe, turn on that bell, leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, may you find your own home, your own person, and your own reason to keep digging, even when the well runs dry.